now. It's never anywhere but airports. How long has 1 month in every 12? And the month is May, where 5 o'clock colours unfold, where blinds are drawn during your services. We have grown to embrace the little changes in our features. The same blue car that lifts us home. Sometimes I think that I just keep it running for you. We remark how the weather seems slightly cooler each year. How last year we even search for now.
The abandoned hospital was a godsend. We are exhausted and short on hope. Dusty coverlets on carefully made beds stretching down the many wards. Those of us with training in medicine have been taken aside and whispered to. October, no word from you. The old city's glowing sickly, remotely to the east. Armed guards around the morphine. Seasons slowing down. 2 of the scouts have still not returned. As yet, there have been no relays from the South Tower. In the emergency bay, someone has erected a sculpture fashioned from used syringes. The ravaged upper sections sealed off. No one allowed above the 3rd level. Nightly, a rage of flame on the horizon. The smell of temples on fire. Linen missing, frost on a heap of wheelchairs stacked in the back field. Another scout gone. The meeting reset for tomorrow. Just before dawn, all my transmissions to you coming back.
I'd like to acknowledge the Jar Jar Wurrung, the traditional owners of this land, and their elders, past and present. And so please welcome Black Forest Smoke, who's going to do a poetry and music piece for you. And it's called Anzac Day Waltz. Anzac Day, in the pre-dawn a standing ceremony. Anzac Day.
Myron, you and Kevin, when and why did you start Going Down Swinging magazine?
We started it off for a few reasons. Kevin Brophy had this idea of starting off a magazine for a few years. And one of those reasons was because whenever we submitted our work to magazines, normally we just get a photocopy rejection. You know, dear blank.
Yeah.
Thanks for submitting to us, but we can't take it. So one of the things Kevin wanted to do was to start off a literary magazine and tell the submitters why we were accepting or rejecting their work, to give them feedback. So in 1979, both our marriages broke up. Kevin was living in Queensland, and so he came back to Melbourne, and he rented a room in my house in North Coburg. And then that idea that he had for a few years became more possible because we were spending all this time together, sharing his house. And Kevin was inspired by a few of the other little magazines around Melbourne, like Kate O'Hearn's Great Australian Whiting. Remember that?
Yes.
Great Australian Whiting and C page 207.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, page 207, something like that.
Something like that. So
There's Chook Chook.
Chook Chook, that's right. Chook Chook.
9 to 5, of course.
Yeah, 9 to 5 was, 70s 9 to 5 was, and also like Muse magazine from Sydney.
Yeah,
Grant Corwell,
yeah,
Les
Grant,
Weeks.
yeah.
So those magazines were the ones we admired and thought, we could do something, we can produce something like this. And so we spoke to a few editors, Kate O'Hearn, maybe even Phil Edmonds from Contempa.
Yes.
And they told us what the process was. And so we made up a flyer and went to poetry readings, and then gave out the flyer and talked to the poets, especially the ones, if we listened to their poems. If we liked one of their poems, we'd say, we're starting a magazine. I think Anya Volvich, we saw Anya Volvich in that pub. Anyway, that was in '79, and Anya had just started writing then, and she gave some of her work to Eric Beach to read, because she was too nervous to read it on stage. She hadn't read before.
Okay.
and we saw that, and she was there too, Anya, and she said, "Oh, he did a horrible job," and so really that because really, if anyone had read Anya's job, she would have thought it was horrible.
Yeah.
But then after that, she began to read herself, and she became wonderful.
Yeah, were you two the only editors, or did you have other people working on that?
For the first 14 issues, I think it was Kevin Bradley and me for most of it, and then we had a few helpers, associate editors. I think Lauren Williams edited.
Louise Craig.
Well, Louise Craig came later, because Kevin and I edited until issue 14, and then Louise Craig, so that was issue 14.
Okay, yep.
That was issue 1.
Yep. Yes.
And then Lynn Boughton and Louise Craig did the next issue, and then Lynn Boughton did a few issues. And then, like magic, every couple of years, there's new editors, and 45 years later, it's still going. So, but basically, no, the new editors have complete control over what the magazine does, and it's been it's been an amazing journey. Each new editor brings something new to it. It's quite often the editors are in their 20s or 30s, so it's very young-minded. So, and it's the most, I guess it's the most radical, if you say radical, most unconventional literary magazine in Australia. The 80s especially, was the poetry scene was very vibrant. Very vibrant. There were venues all over the place in Melbourne, and they were always inspiring, and I think probably there is, going down swinging does capture some of that poetic spirit from those venues.
With the venues, how important have they been, especially the venues with an open mic? How fruitful has that been for Melbourne poets?
It's been one of the marks of excellence in the poetry world, because you have the featured reader, the more experienced poet who has read lots of times and has a body of work behind them, and then you have the new poets. And I remember when I was very new, it was all very exciting and all very frightening and nerve-wracking. But it was an opportunity to get up there and try something, and I think it was one of the reasons why there were so many poets around Melbourne, because there were venues, and they'd go to those venues and say, well, I can do better than that, or well, I can, you're allowed to write about that, well, is that a poem? Is that a poem? But I could do that as well. So I think it was the venues are very important to the literary culture of Melbourne.
Now, how hard was it to get a gig going in a country town?
Well, it wasn't hard at all, really. The first reading we did was in 2013, and that was called the Chamber Pot. The Chamber Pot Poets, I think it was called. Yeah, Chamber Pot Poets, and we had, I think we had about 5 readers. Ross Donlan was one, the Manger sisters, Nathan Kerno, and that was because the cafe owner there, in that cafe, he had original art on the wall, and every month or so there'd be a new exhibition. And he wanted some poetry on the wall, so I put some poems on the wall and got to know him, and he said, could you get some poets together and have a poetry reading here? And I said, yeah, I know lots of poets, and the reason, and it was pretty easy to start Chamber Poets because I knew so many poets from 40 years as a poet, and so it was easy to contact poets, and in most cases they love the opportunity to come out an hour from Melbourne and read to a new audience. And so yeah, so we had, so we had this poetry reading, and Philip from Chamber Poets, the manager, said that went well. Can we do another one? So we did another one. And then after a while, it was just two. I think it was 2 featured readers, and then a big open section. And then from Chamber Poets number 3, we had my band, the Black Forest Smoke, who did a song at the start and a song after the interval. So had a bit of poetry and music as well. And we had audiences of up to 60 people in there, up to 50 people in there, which was packed because it was quite a small coffee shop.
No, that's a good size audience.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then after a few years we moved to the RSL. The new owners came to the coffee shop, they didn't want the poetry there, so we moved to the RSL, and that's another, it's been a good venue. We've been there ever since, until COVID. So how many years is that? That's from 2013 to 2000
well, until 2020.
Yeah, so we had about 60 readings there, once a month, on a Saturday afternoon once a month.
How important was the Poets Union?
I think the Poets Union was very important. I first learned of the Poetry Union around 78, 79 when they brought out that anthology, the directory.
Yeah, the Poets Union.
Have you got a copy of that?
Yes, the Australian Poets Directory.
One of my first jobs as a poet was at Pentridge Jail through Rosemary Nissen from the Poets Union, who organised poets to go do readings in Pentridge Jail and also do workshops in Pentridge Jail with a few of the long-time prisoners in there.
Oh, I know. Tom and I and another one of the poets too went in there. Met Ray Mooney first time.
Alan Eric Martin.
Eric Martin. Those two stand out in particular. But Tom and I got kicked out because we were told we took marijuana in. We didn't.
No, that was Kevin.
I know. Tom and I got blamed.
Well, at my very first reading, which was in October 1982, it's not that one, was at the Organ Factory in Clifton Hill.
Oh, of course.
It was the 13th of October 1982 at night time. And it was this big reading. Pio was there, Anya Volvich, Eric Beach, Kevin Brophy, Yalchi, Jazz H. Duke, and Chris Mann. So at that reading, Chris Mann was the last reader, and he read Lying on the Floor, and doing all kinds of strange, weird poetry, lying on the floor. So that was an amazing reading, and another amazing reading, which I think might have been before that, before I even got the guts to get up and read. I went to poetry readings for a few years, but I was too scared to get up.
Okay.
But I went to the Surrealist Festival. You were there. You were dressed up beautifully dressed in a leather jacket, and did a set. But Kevin and I went there on our bicycles, and as we came into the venue, I can't remember where it was, in Fitzroy somewhere. We saw this oldish looking man with a long beard and bald head. And we said, "Is this where the Surrealist Festival is?" And he said, and pointed, and then
That was Jazz H. Duke.
And that was Jazz H. Duke. About an hour later, we were listening to all these great poets and performances of a surreal nature. It was just fantastic, very exciting, lots of energy in the room. And then the announcer said, and the next poet is Jazz H. Duke. And when he came out, we said, "Oh, this guy's a stutterer. What's going to happen here?" And then Jazz Duke got up on stage and he said, I think his first poem might have been Dada, probably Dada, and then another, which was just astounding, with him yelling Dada, 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 Dada in different tones and volumes and frequencies, and it was just, your mind was going like this with this pulsating voice. And then he did a poem. He said, he got a book and said, "I want to do a poem by Yeats." And he opened up the book. He tore out a Yeats poem, put it in his mouth, chewed it, and ate it. And said, "Thank you very much. That's what I think of Yeats." And that was mad. So things like that were just amazing. And then I went early in the 80s. I went to the Fringe Festival, to the Adelaide Poetry Festival, and one of the nights they had a marquee and had poets there, and Michael Wilding was there. He read as well, but Eric Beach got up, and he did a blues song as a poem. I said, "Oh, you can do a blues song. A blues song you can do a poem as a song as a poem." So that wasn't a weird anecdote, but it was great being in that tent with all those bohemian-looking people, mostly young, smoking and drinking and laughing, and it was all very inspiring and very very intoxicating. There were a few occasions where they had short poems on trams, and then in the 90s we had poetry on the trains, on the Connex trains, and they were on what they call decals.
Decals, yeah.
Decals. So they have a poem and then they have a piece of art next to it.
Yeah.
And that ran on the Melbourne trains for 4 or 5 years.
What do you think of the future for poetry in Melbourne?
I don't really know, because COVID has put a stop to a lot of that poetry. And I think, I haven't written much since COVID. I haven't written much since the poetry readings have stopped, because those venues, they inspire you, because they go, "Well, there's a reading coming up next month, I better get something ready for it."
That's right.
But if there's no reading, you just know, I'll just play Words with Friends today. Go play golf.
COVID has been something it has done. It's brought out Zoom and various online ways of doing poetry.
Well, I think that's the other thing, because my daughter Lucy, she's she's very much into poetry, and especially on Zoom. She goes to a few places, but she regularly listens and joins in, and it's like a community. It's like a family. The Zoom, because, and I guess that's what it was at the venues. Each venue had its own atmosphere, had its depending on the the perseverance. What an amazing reading that was. And even at the end when they were rebuilding it, the builders were around and we were still in there every Saturday afternoon. Here's another poem. Here's a poem for you.
Oh no, that Brunswick Street in Fitzroy for a while was just fantastic. The Punters Club, the Perth, the Rochester, it was just went on.
Watching what's happening on Zoom today, it's fantastic, and it's just another way that poetry now, you can be connected to the whole world through a poetry reading. It's not just the venue. The venue is the internet.
Yeah.
And that's been very popular. I've seen a few times when Lucy's been watching or performing on there. And the audience varies, like it always does at a poetry reading, from the very young to the older. Well, the people in their 50s and 60s, and that's the other good thing, where you've got all these different generations mixing together. It's wonderful.
Now, my thank yous, John Ashton, for agreeing to be MC. Just a hero, fabulous poet, and wonderful man. I can't thank him enough. My feature readers, Ian McBride, I would have to say, is right up there with our best poets, possibly the best, in my opinion. And Communinos, what can I say about Communinos? He's a fabulous poet. He's a real voice for Australia. He's a real voice.
I first met Communinos. We were doing a reading in at La Mama. It was my first reading. I don't know, he seemed to be very experienced. He was wild. He was kind of wild, almost uncontainable, and fully self-expressed. He obviously didn't know that poetry was supposed to be delivered seriously. Just, so thumbed his nose at that convention.
Oh, yes.
Yes. So fully self-expressed, wild, mad, bad, and dangerous to know. Mr. Communinos deserves.
Well, I'm going to read one of mine first, called I Am the Alley. And it has been an inspiration for one of Kerry's poems, which I'll read after this one. I am the alley, the laneway, the back street. I am the outside of the street. I am the stinky, smelly, grotty, greasy alley. I am the garbage bags arranged, ravaged by the birds and rats.
I am the grey, greasy water that seeps out under back fences onto bluestone and bitumen. I am the inside air on the outside night. I am the roaring gutter seas. I am the cardboard boxes stacked and piled into mountains. I am the lettuce leaves that rot in them. I am the rain that melts them. I am the delivery vans that squash them and spread them further down the street. I am the cigarette butts that swim in the gutters and litter the lane. I am the milk crates that stack up against the back fences.
I am the hemorrhoids on the waiters' bums. I am the wheelie bins that wait in a new... Sorry, I'm finding it very difficult to read in this light.
It's really hard.
It is hard.
Yeah. This place is hard. You just wait until you get Kerry's book.
I believe it's a very small font size. So I'm gonna diss this and just read something I remember and something from the past. The other day I was at a slam at the VCA, a student slam, and people were reading stuff off their phone and they were saying, "This is new shit. because it's on the phone, which implies that anything on paper is sort of old shit. And anything in a book is really old shit. So I'll just read this one. Look, up in the sky, it's a bird, it's a plane. No, it's Superwog. Strange visitor from a European country with powers and abilities far beyond those of normal Anglo-Saxons, who can gut and fillet mighty man-eaters, pick up hot dim sims in his bare hands, faster than a squirt of vinegar, more powerful than tzatziki, able to use the lifts in tall buildings, and who, disguised as Con Pappas, mild-mannered fishmonger at a great metropolitan shopping centre, fights a never-ending battle against McDonald's, Kentucky Fried Chicken, the American takeaway.
I'm talking to Komnenos Zervos today.
Are you?
Komnenos has had a long history, like myself, since the late 70s, early 80s, involved in organising and reading poetry around town. Commie, 40 or so years ago,
Yeah.
Dinny Hearn challenged you and Bev Roberts on an SBS book program that performance poetry shouldn't be called poetry. And you...
No, he was playing a devil's advocate, I reckon, because he sort of said some people would say it's not poetry. He didn't say I don't say it's poetry. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But, at that point in time, there was definitely a poetry elite, and there was also this sort of grassroots charge from below of poets like you and me who were doing it in cafes and pubs and, you know, in the street.
Yeah.
Tom the Street Poet. So it was, there were like two different worlds of poetry.
It was, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. You also, at the time though, with Bev and that programs that were brought up, doing workshops in schools.
Yeah.
For instance, the Broady Book of Stories. Now,
Yeah.
that's probably one of the first writer in schools collections.
I think Eric Beach might have had a collection published in South Australia with his, what was it, Words in Motion or something, with
I haven't come across that one.
Jenny Bolt. Anyway, Eric introduced me to working with kids in schools, and so did Kerry Scuffins, who was teaching at Fitzroy High School, and she invited me in to do workshops there, or do a performance there for her kids. So, yeah. And the Broady Book of Stories was organised by the Education Department. Somebody had heard of my work and asked me to be one of the writers that went into the schools. There was sort of 9 different schools represented, primary schools and secondary schools in the Broadmeadows area. And they produced a very good anthology of their work. But they had visiting writers, and then they had a selection. People submitted their work to be published in this book. There was an editing process. There were kids selected, and they went on a writing camp up near Bendigo, and I was the writer in residence for that, for the 2 weeks. And every 2 days they'd bus up another school, a different school, and we'd work on their stories and their poems to go into the book. So it was a really good process. And after that, we had a tour, a performance, going round to all the different schools from some of the writers that were in the book as well, which was great.
I was so pleased when I was just looking at this material that it happened so early on, and it was obviously a successful workshop experience.
It was, yeah.
And from what the bit of the video I saw, the kids looked really rapt to be involved. Yeah.
Well, I generally found with kids at schools that there was one idea of poetry and that was rhyming stuff, and they'd say boring and, you know, uninteresting. And then there was this new kind of writing that was coming from real life experience and social realist type of poetry about people's lives, and it didn't necessarily rhyme, and it was just a way of expressing yourself in words, which is, you know, the broadest definition of poetry, really.
Well, I think the term social realism really is apt, because so many of the early poets were mirroring our times.
Well, they were living the life.
Yeah.
They were poets.
That's right.
That was their, you know, they might have been unemployed and getting unemployment benefits, but their occupation was poet.
Yeah. Now, you're a teacher and you had a reasonably good education. What poetry had you read up until the stage where you became a poet in residence?
Yeah. Well, my parents wanted me to be a doctor, so I did science subjects at school. I didn't do much poetry at school. I always loved Shakespeare when we did it in English literature in you know, say year 10 or something like that. I really loved the way they played with language, or Shakespeare used language. I could relate to it, even though there were words I couldn't understand. But it was good fucking good writing. My first experience with poetry was a performance poet from Greece, actually, called Katerina Gogou, G-O-G-O-U, and I saw her work, and she was a really good performance poet, a street poet type of performance poet. And when I had my cafe in Lonsdale Street, someone brought along an album of John Cooper Clarke, and I thought, wow, you know, that's really modern. That's really today. You know, I can dig this. This is not poetry I've been taught to believe is poetry.
Now, what year was that about when you
I opened it up in
there?
'79, and it closed down in early '83, and that's where I first organised a poetry reading. My girlfriend at the time was into reading this Katerina Gogou, and so we had a night of her poetry, but I read the English translations, and I had translated her poems into English, and I was performing the English part of that. And that's when I met Pio and the anarchist poets, and shortly after they started having readings at the cafe at Tuckpinna.
Fabulous.
Yeah. That's where I met Tom.
Yes.
And Pio, Jas Duke,
yes.
Anya Wolwitz, yeah, all that crew. After Tuckpinna, I was involved with the Living Room, you know, Anita Sinclair.
Yes, matter of fact, she mentioned you. I interviewed her.
Oh yeah, well, that's where I met also Myron Lysenko and Kevin Brophy, and yeah, I met Tom. Tom was also involved with Living Room.
Oh, yeah.
And then so I got to go to Cafe Jammin'. That's when I really felt at home. You see,
yeah.
I was part of a very strict Greek community before I entered the poetry scene, and the poets were a new community to me, and accepting, warm, you know, understanding, sort of judgmental type of people. And I felt very much at home amongst the poets.
That sentiment has been echoed by a lot of the people I've interviewed, that welcoming aspect, that, and yet they felt quite free to say what they had. The open section is a concept pretty much really, if not developed in Melbourne, really solidified in the Melbourne gigs. What do you think's been the value or the importance of that over the years?
Yes. The first few times I attended a poetry reading, I sat shaking nervously at the side, waiting to see if I'm going to put my name on the board to go on the open section. But it's a tremendous way of getting new people exposed to an audience, and an audience exposed to new people. And yeah, well, you know.
poets exposed to other poets.
Poets exposed to other poets, other people's work, other styles. It's a good thing. And I like the idea that you have a feature in the middle of the open section.
Yeah.
That's a good thing too, because it provides a sort of a step up.
Mm-hmm.
My first feature was at Cafe Jammin in about 1984. I think my first feature was, and I did. It was called 3 Years of Personal Growth Through Poetry. How boring was that title?
Not at the time, it wasn't.
At the time it was revolutionary.
Yeah, that's right. The fact that poets would get feature spots at this gig and that gig, La Mama, do you think that's the kind of thing that built the inner confidence needed to...
Oh, absolutely, Ken. Like, that was our school. That was our... That's how we progressed. We did this one, we did that one. We eventually got a La Mama Poetica gig, and you know they had their sort of value to a person's personal development as a poet, professional development, and you know, like getting invited into schools, getting paid to do it. You know, a workshop at school, or a small amount of money to be the feature. You know, it wouldn't cover your tram fares, but
it was
a thought. Yeah, it was like the professional. All right, we're employed, but we're underpaid. So, but I saw that immediately that wasn't going to create a future for me. So I tried to get out to music venues, like Eric Beach was doing jazz.
With Bob's Centigrade?
That's right, yes. Yeah. And I started doing the Melbourne Folk Club and getting gigs there, and getting gigs at the folk festivals in Canberra and here in Melbourne, and getting paid for my words, which was fantastic. So, you know, little by little, with a bit of schoolwork and a bit of performance money, I was able to you know, earn a living. After 12 months of that, the Centrelink classified me as underemployed and not worthy of unemployment benefits.
Classic Centrelink.
Yeah,
eh?
which made me just want to earn more money quickly.
Yeah. The Poets Union did make strong efforts to point out that poets should get a reading fee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was the first thing I asked. Whenever somebody asked me to do a reading, I'd ask. That's the first thing I'd ask, and that's, you know, I'd push that point that, you know, this is work, and we deserve to be paid.
I never really wanted to apply. I wanted to please myself, and I think that attitude is in a lot of the poets. We've got the ability to mirror against the other poets and see where we're at.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, it's hard to constantly having to justify your existence by means of a grant application.
Yeah.
It's hard work.
This long life, like you've had in the poetry scene, what would you have done without it, or how has it shaped you?
Well, before being a poet, I had a qualification in microbiology. I worked as an industrial microbiologist for Kraft Foods for 2 years. I was a youth worker in Richmond, and then I opened up a cafe called Sakbina in 1979. So I had quite a different array of employments before I became a poet. But poetry and being a poet was the one I chased most vigorously.
Yes.
I was determined to make it. I was determined. I had been convinced by poets like Jas Duke and yourself and Anya Wolwitz and Pio and Kevin Brophy and Myron Lysenko that poetry was an entertainment form, that poetry could entertain you, that you could listen to it at a venue and be entertained, and also that the poets needed to be paid for their work. And so I went forward with that attitude, and I think that's what made it work.
We built up this fantastic community in Melbourne that spread out to regional centres, country towns. All the major cities at least have 1 or 2 poetry gigs a week.
Yeah.
With what we call performance poetry, our entertainment. What's the future for it, do you think, Colin?
Oh, well, it's always been there, and it will always be there. It's the most immediate form of personal expression, to write what you're thinking down on a piece of paper and read it to someone else, or get someone else to read it. So it's always going to be there, I reckon. Even with the internet, you know, people are making poetry on Facebook every day. You know, there's so much poetry on Facebook. Well, in my feed anyway, because I'm friends with poets. But it's always going to be there. Don't you reckon, Ken?
Well, I do. And also Zoom, the internet has become a venue up to a point.
Yes.
Because during the COVID lockdown, there were all those Zoom poetry gigs.
That's right.
And it's a bit sort of disconcerting at one stage and terrific at the other stage. Terrific, we're still doing it. But you weren't there.
Yeah.
That's what got me.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's definitely something about a live reading. And a famous American poet, I forgot his name right now, said, you know, you create this between the poet and the audience, you create this field of energy.
Yes.
And both parts are contributing to this field, and that's what, like, that Charles Olson, his name was.
Ah, Charles.
Yeah,
terrific. Very public poet.
Yeah. And yeah, I believe that to be true, that you can read the same poem to 10 different audiences, and it's 10 different interpretations of those words.
Quite right.
Because of the different audiences.
Over the years, with Melbourne, you've probably seen through the poet publishers Black Pepper, going down swinging. We've produced from our poetry venue community quite a few award winners, there's Premier State Prize winners. It's been very fruitful, do you think?
Yeah, I still think there's the poetry elite and the rest of us, and that still exists, and it will probably exist as long as people are paid to be poets at universities and to lecture on poetry in universities. And that's tied so intimately with the publishing arm of things, and the publishers look to the universities, tell them who to publish. That's it. And really, the new wave of poets now, and the most of those are now like the slam poets, get up there and do it quickly and do it to a time limit. And well, I think they're going to find it hard to make the transition to academia unless they, you know, study at university and writing.
The point you're making, I think, is quite right, that those that are winning the awards and getting great funding in overseas fellowships, whatever, are academics. Because the level of the intellectual endeavour in the arts and writing these days is pretty intense.
Yeah.
There are scientists, there are doctors, there are psychiatrists, there are engineers, teachers, up there in that academic level.
Yeah.
But the open section, you've probably seen over the years, plenty of them happy to read.
Yeah.
At the open gig, the Dan O'Connell, the
Chris
passionate
Wallace Club, I've
tones.
seen him read the Dan many times, and Chris Wallace-Crabbe.
Chris, yes, yeah.
And a lot of academic names. Anthony Lawrence, lots of people.
The late, wonderful Geordie Albiston.
What about Maxine Beniba Clark?
Oh,
she used to.
A knockout.
Yeah, that's her.
One of my movies that had the most hits is Maxine reading at the Wheeler Centre once. And I didn't even go there to film it, but there was another and I filmed her, and at the end I was knocked out. I thought that'll be one. A similar young poet that blew my mind in Melbourne a few years ago was Gabriel Everall.
Oh, Gabriella.
Everall, I heard her a couple of years ago at the Dam, and she knocked my socks off.
Right.
After the gig I went up and I said, look, I really love that poem. She went, oh, thank you, a man telling me that I like my poetry. And I said, well, you're pretty tough, but
what happened there, Ken?
Oh, it's all right.
Memory what? Oh,
okay. I don't know what happened, but it's still going. If poetry has any effect, does it have a political or social effect? Is it meant to?
I don't think my poetry or poetry in general changes people's minds. However, it presents an alternative way of looking at things, which if you are thinking and challenging those things in the first place, you find a sympathetic voice, a sympathetic attachment to that poet's poems. If you've already been thinking along those lines. But it doesn't actually change a person, I don't think. I don't think it does.
Maybe just a window too in other lives and other ways.
I think poets see the world from a slightly different angle to everybody else, and that allows other people to see it in other ways too, I think.
I couldn't agree more with that comment. Look, thanks, comment. Thank commenting us. I think we're just about out of battery there, but good. Okay, thank you, camera.
Thank you, camera. Thank you, poets.
Thanks, Commonos. Just a couple of other things come to mind too. Commonos has this terrific poem called Footscray. In fact, there are probably other poems about Footscray, but I've never heard them. And so I reckon the Western Bulldogs should be on your case. To write a new poem for the doggies. All right. No enthusiasm whatsoever.
No.
Is there a list? We love that bar manager.
We certainly do love this bar manager. Just a few housekeeping things before we get into the open mic. First of all, anybody on the open mic, the first person on the open mic that hasn't read at one of our gigs before, please do let us know, because there is a secret prize waiting for you in the crowd. Michael is a fantastic poet in his own right. He does so much work gratis for nothing to help so much of the Melbourne art scene. He is a beautiful human being, and I'm very happy that he's here today. Very, very happy to have him here as our first ever feature at Cherry Poets. Would you please welcome Michael Ranks? Thank you for this amazing lecture, and I will let Michael tell you about the construction of this incredible thing, but it's a good story.
Orthodox Church.
Orthodox Church.
Oh, thank you very much, Steve. This podium actually I found outside, out the front on the nature strip of a church about halfway through 2019. and yeah, so I dragged it home, and the base is from a dumpster at work. So yeah, so there you go. This is officially the new podium for Cherry Poets.